And we are live. This is Rick Rock with Real Fridays. Every Friday at 12:30, it is Real Fridays, where myself and supposedly Brock Cassidy, the Chief Revenue Officer over at NewRez, and Jeremy Potter, who's going to be calling in hopefully at our at this time here in a couple of minutes. He's at the airport in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there's Brock. Good to see you, Brock. How are you, man?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I cannot. There we go. Good. You're really good, actually. I just got off the phone with Jeremy. He's at Minneapolis St. Paul Airport. He's going to log in for a couple minutes once he's boarded his plane, just so he can say a quick hello to our audience. But how was your week? Let's just weekly headlines just to talk about what's happened this week. Of course, Chairman Powell said that he's not going to raise rates, which I actually think is probably, or decrease rates. Which I actually think is pretty wise. I actually support the chairman's decision to kind of hold off and to continue to lead with more of a sober, steady hand on the market. I'm not, I have said for a couple of years now, Brock, that I feel we should be at 6.5% to 7% for kind of a mature mortgage market, and everything else needs to sort of settle around that. If we need more houses because costs, homes are appraising too high, then we need to put our time and energy on just new construction and kind of rapid rebuilds, if you will. But I don't think it's healthy as an economy to always go back into, cutting interest rates. I don't think we have to be, economists or even, more of an expert than we are in the market to say that it just seems having rates at zero is not a good solution. And we need to have a healthy sort of cushion there between rock bottom and in the midpoint.
Yeah, no, I generally agree. I mean, so at this point, we're pricing in basically one cut this year, I think. Is that kind of what you're seeing? Can you hear me?
That's well, and the answer is yes, but can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Sorry, there's just a lag.
You can hear me, right, Brock?
Yes.
Okay, good. We've been saying for the last few cycles that we're going to get, 25 basis points here or 50 basis points there. And in time again, we've been wrong. Right. And so I don't know. I mean, the answer is yes, we are accounting for, from a capital market standpoint, a modest, expected sort of cut with respect, but I don't really expect it to adjust much with respect to mortgage rates. I think it's going to be another scenario where, the Fed cuts 50 basis points or 25 basis points more than likely, but it doesn't have any impact at all on mortgage rates.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think with basically what you're saying, and no crystal ball here. Try not to play the rate prediction game too much. I guess I see more like real estate data and more, the mixture of purchase, mortgage data, and real estate data is kind of where I spend my time. And we are seeing a lot more listing price reductions. We're seeing a lot longer days on market. We're seeing a lot more inventory compared to any time in the last several years.
Yeah.
So those are, there's different ways to get to affordability for buyers, right? Sellers cutting prices now. I think looking at the way in Housing Wire's most recent analysis they have on their site, 41% of listings have done a price decrease. That's a price reduction while it's listed. So that's a massive.
That's incredible.
Even a couple of months ago, it was like 30 mid 30%. So and much lower in the prior years. So, I talk about this with all our partners all the time. I was speaking to an executive this morning at a 48 state lender. So, we were trying to zoom out and not talk regionally, just talk generally. I mean, the story is still that it's soft. Buyers and sellers are expecting different things. Affordability for buyers is bad. Sellers are cutting prices, but not quickly, not fast enough to meet buyers' expectations. So there's still a misalignment. There's still not that many deals happening on like existing home sales, or even new home sales have declined a little bit. So that's the type of data I look at, but I do feel like it's going the right direction. Sellers are getting the message. The average home sitting over 100 days on the market now. That's a massive difference from even a couple months ago. So, yeah.
It's interesting. A friend of mine just sold his house in Charlotte, or just in the suburbs of Charlotte, and he said the same thing. What was interesting, I think the average in his county, in his local MSA, it was something to the effect of like 93 days or 96 days. The average home on the market is staying on the market before it's sold. And he went through a few price reductions from what he had listed it at to what, and it's still not sold. Actually, it's still not sold. He's only about maybe 60 days in or so. So he was getting, kind of frustrated, because I think every seller wants to believe that there's going to be a buyer, it's going to go quick. And there's a certain amount of seller's anxiety that's associated with that. And this is not a big home. I mean, this is a home that you'd think is at a price point like 300, 310, 320, that you'd think is at a price point that would sell pretty quick. But the problem is, even a $300,000 home at a 7% rate, you're still looking at $2,500 a month, $3,000 a month. And so, and that's a tough nut when, and this is kind of an interesting, like, economic question around how bimodal, and this is just us talking, obviously, but it's like, we're very bimodal in our economy, right? You have people that can afford the 400, 500,000 or up home. And then you have those who have a really difficult time affording the $300,000 home. So they rent, right? They can afford the payment, but they can't afford to qualify for the mortgage.
Right.
And that to me is a fascinating dichotomy, because, it gets to a point now, in order to even get an apartment these days, you got to pass background checks. They pull credit. They almost run their own eligibility scenario to determine whether or not you are, an appropriate consumer to lend this apartment to for the next 12 or 24 months.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. I mean, between the criminal background checks, the financial checks, first, by the time you do first month's, last month's security, you basically have a down payment on a house.
Yeah, I think Potter sent us in our group chat. I think it was this morning. Potter shared something interesting. As long as he's on the plane, I'll parrot it for him. It was comparing minimum wage to median home value. I think it was to be the equivalent buying power of the market in the 80s. The minimum wage would have to be $64 now. That's how much the home affordability has changed versus minimum wage versus average wage. I don't know. It's probably not quite that stuff, but it's crazy out there for first time home buyers. The average home buyer this year, I think, is like mid 50s. It's like the first time home buyers are really in a bad spot.
Well, they are. I mean, I think back in the early 80s, the total wallet share of your mortgage payment was like 25% of your income or 30% of your income, like at most, and now it's like 45, 50, 55, 60% of your income. It's got to a point where, it just defines the affordability challenge. Right. I did see, recently, not long ago, I was in Montana, and in Montana, I saw, and there's almost no market greater that represents the divide between the working class and the wealthier classes that actually can afford these homes. In Bozeman is littered with a lot of California buyers that came obviously from California during COVID. Home prices, just jumped through the roof. Cost of living is tremendously a lot lower. Taxes are a lot lower. And so the available homes that were there were acquired quickly. A lot of them have been torn down and built substantially greater homes. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the service-driven industries, skiing and just other things that are kind of tourism and other things around, service-related jobs, they have no place to live. So I saw this community of all tiny homes. It was really fascinating. It was the first time I had seen almost like you would see a suburban neighborhood, but instead of like all these, 2,000 square foot, 3,000 square foot homes, like littering in a cul-de-sac, it was just one tiny home after another. I'd never seen something like that. I'd seen tiny homes here and there, but never a planned community of just tiny homes adjacent to a suburban community. I mean, it's, I don't know if those are just short-term, solutions to a much bigger problem, or they might be necessary steps to addressing the shorter-term issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, if Potter were here, I know he's been digging a lot into like factory built housing that can be, I don't know what the factor is, 25% of the cost of stick built, things like that, maybe even lower in some places. So there's got to be some more creativity. And then the other thing you mentioned, but I'm no expert on that. The other thing that you mentioned a minute ago was that people actually probably can make the payments. Their rent payments are stretching them just as far. Talk to me about what you're seeing with like the Vantage Score FICO conversation. I think like the Vantage Score credit scoring is now talking about taking into account on-time rent payments and amount of rent payments into their scoring. Do you think that's going to be a big win? That's always been like a running conversation of, if I can pay $3,000 of rent a month, shouldn't I be able to buy a home with a $3,000 mortgage payment? And
100%. I mean, no, I'm with you. No, it's a real problem, right? Because ultimately, those who have invested in multi-unit apartment communities, but society is better when people own homes. Longer term wealth is built through real estate and home ownership, without any question, whether it's investment home ownership, ownership, or home ownership as a primary. Your longer term stable wealth that you control, that you can transact fairly quickly, is just a lot more accommodating and supportive of the American family. And renting is not necessarily that solution, right? People are less invested in the communities that they're in, for those that they rent in, and so that was largely my big objection, to be honest, with a lot of the immigration related deportations, because, sure, people are here illegally. They shouldn't be here illegally. Totally get that. Those who are here, who were temporarily allowed to be here waiting for a court date, to some degree, who are caught in this crossfire politically, they should remain here. And putting the politics aside, get them into homes. Because when they're in homes, they're invested in their communities. When they're invested in communities, they're paying taxes. When they're paying taxes, they're supporting schools. When they're supporting schools, their children are in those schools. They're getting, they're being raised within, the American cultural and academic systems. So it seems really short-sighted to rip these families out, because to me, it's about home ownership and getting them plugged into home ownership. And with all these products being pulled from many lender offerings, it just raises the bar that much higher for consumers to be able to afford the home that these products supported. These foreign national products, these H-1B visa type products. It's really it's too bad to see. I saw that I did see what you were referring to here. I'm going to share my screen here. What you were referring to in that was these numbers here, which I think is a good pivot, because it really shows the fact that what you were just highlighting, that in 105 days average home, average time on,
especially those two on the bottom right. Those two on the bottom right, we watch really closely, dealing with existing home sales and purchase LOs. Yeah,
and just to help me understand what NewZip does, like how does NewZip, so I'm assuming the longer a home stays on the market, the more important it is for a lender to stay in contact with consumers who are looking for a home. So to some degree, does this stretching out, not to say you're wanting this, but this stretching out, does that help NewZip in its value proposition?
Yeah.
Is there an angle for that?
Yeah, it's like pros and cons. It helps our value proposition in a market where transactions happen really fast. LOs and agents, usually don't have as many communication issues, or as many, it's easier for them to partner. It's easy for them to work together. It's easy for them to incubate the client together, because it all happens in days. When it's a multi-month long process, multi-year long process in some cases, the value of NewZip, I think, does become more clear. We're assigning a concierge to the client all the way through, who is a licensed agent themselves, and just bridging the gap with both our technology and our team, between the client, the lending conversation, and the real estate conversation. So yeah, I think so. But the other thing that we see is it just takes us longer to, NewZip only gets paid on closings, just like most in the ecosystem. And we make 98% of our revenue that way. So it does stretch out our curve to recognize revenue, just like it does for real estate agents, just like it does for purchase lenders. So, it's pros and cons, but we still see, we've seen our horizon from like us making an agent referral to closing drag out a little bit. Our average is 4 months right now, this year to date, from us making an agent match to a buyer agent to them actually successfully buying a home. But we've seen a lot more transactions take 5, 6, 7 months than we used to. We used to see about 95% of closings happening within the first 6 months. Now it's like 80% happen within the first 6 months and 20% drag out longer than that. So, it's like we all like fast, easy transactions, but I think NewZip's value is more clear when clients do need more help or a longer process.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it's kind of intuitive that if the shorter cycle, in a more competitive environment, the reason to stay in contact with the consumer with shorter timeframes, the reason to stay in contact with the consumer becomes different because it's super competitive. With longer sales cycles, the reason to stay in contact with the consumer is just as important because that gives the consumer that many more options.
Right.
And and then the more options that they dabble into, the more that particular consumer can get untethered from that particular lender.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And most LOs, are really good at keeping in touch with a client for, the first 30, 45 days. And then, especially in like the CD environment, consumer direct environment, it's hard to manage that pipeline of someone you pre-approved 3 months ago. Not say you're not keeping in touch with them at all, but it certainly helps to have other people keeping them warm. And we share consistent real estate data with them, and we share consistent, listings, ask the agent for updates every week. So the LO gets all that, fed right into either their CRM or their email or both. So our value becomes a little more clear to LOs and to lenders when they have these longer tail transactions. Well,
this was the other piece I think that is sort of, runs in parallel. This article here by Logan runs in parallel to this conversation here, where Logan makes the contention in this article, which was published this morning here from the Housing Wire just a couple hours ago. He indicates that he would have thought that the Fed, if they had this job report 2 weeks ago, that they would have cut rates in this past meeting by 50 basis points. So his prediction is that there's a 50 basis point reduction in that should be coming down the pike in September, and where the labor market is not outperforming, it's underperforming expectations, but at the same time it's not bad, and that's what's hard. The unemployment rate hovers at 4.2%. Which in many markets is enviable,
Right.
But obviously there was growth, private ed and health services, which makes a lot of sense given the demographic trends of retirees, retiring. But there's a lot of cutback. Obviously, government's cut back quite a bit. I mean, think about the jobs that have been reduced out of the federal government, and our unemployment rate is really holding strong.
Yeah.
So they're getting absorbed somewhere. Like these people. Or they're still continuing to get paid in their furlough or severance agreements, and it really hasn't.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some hidden stuff in here of like, people that aren't filing for unemployment yet because they have a little bit longer of a severance or a little bit longer of a stretched out employment that they know is going to end soon. The other thing I would wonder is, the other way these numbers sometimes lie is like workforce participation. Like you have to apply for at least one job per month in order to be counted as unemployed or something like that, depending on the methodology. I wonder if we're seeing a decrease in like people attempting to get employment as certain types of jobs are getting eliminated. I don't know the answer to that. Probably no one does, but those are the things I wonder when I'm like, it doesn't feel.
Do you think the labor market is more competitive?
What? Sorry.
Do you think the labor market is becoming more competitive because of the number of people out there looking for jobs? Because it would strike me that an indicator to reflect that would be true would be wages. Wages would probably go up. Or no, wages, would they go up or down? They probably actually, with more,
I guess they'd go down
with more options for employers. Labor, wages would go down.
Yeah, if there's more supply of workers, it would maybe go down.
So that's an interesting sort of question as to whether or not.
Yeah, I'd love to see how the.
But this, I found this article to be really interesting because I don't see where. Yeah, this part of the article is really interesting because the number of workers, again, and this hasn't really been impacted by the deportations, but there was a slight. Looks like in today's report we saw a decline in this labor slightly. As I often write, mortgage rates are too high for the builders to make housing construction grow. So rates falling today is a good first step to try to reverse the negative data we've seen. This is a really fascinating. So much of the market is based on is based on the confidence of what we're doing, and that's probably the greatest challenge between the administration's strategy. And I'm only looking at this from the lens of mortgage companies aiming to plan for their growth or not growth over the course of the next year in how you hedge a pipeline, because you hedge a pipeline based on what your confidence is based on rate volatility. And there's things called TBAs. They're to be announced. Like you have a hedge pipeline, Brock, and you have a pipeline that's locked at like 6.5%. Capital markets will buy TBAs to offset risk because you don't want to if you have a locked pipeline at 6.5% and all of a sudden rates pop to 7.5%, servicers that's worth less. So you think you're getting X for price for that product, but you're actually getting it Y when the loan actually closes. And to account for that delta in secondary, they actually buy what's called TBA. So it's basically hedging. You're basically you're either going to short your position or you're going to go long in your position. Mm-hmm. And shorting your position, hedges it one way, and going long hedges it another way. But every time you buy a TBA, it costs you money, so your secondary costs go up. So then your profitability of the mortgage company goes down. And in more volatile markets, it's hard to plan for your organization of how are we going to grow? What should we do? What should our forecast be? Right? Builders are the same way, right? Builders are looking at this saying, we don't know what we're building to.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, with our clients, we had a lot of conversations in July with our lender clients. We had a lot of conversation in July of how, someone's rate lock is going to run out on, at the end of the month or at some point in the month. And they don't know what the heck's going to happen then. So let's try to get this, this deal closed. That's a familiar conversation in all markets, but it seemed a particularly aggressive conversation in this market where they're probably worried about their hedging. They're worried about what their future rates are going to look like if the client's transaction drags out another week or month. So, all these people trying to avoid floats, I guess, so that they can, make sure that we can get the client actually closed on their purchase.
That's right. That's right. And, and the percent of consumers, there's always a question. And I believe in most pipelines, and I would need to validate this, but I believe in most pipelines, the percent of consumers pulling out of a purchase contract because of the rate environment is up. I believe. Okay.
Yeah.
And as a result, that creates havoc on your hedge, on your pipeline, because when you're hedging, you're expecting that loan to close, and you're doing a bulk delivery, a mandatory delivery for larger lenders on that group of loans. And if all of a sudden you get a percentage of those loans that fall out, affecting your pull-through ratio, then all of a sudden that TBA just became even more expensive, right? So it's a really interesting, precarious, bankers, we like stable, predictive markets, right? And with Trump and tariffs, we announced, I think, a heavier tariff, obviously a week ago to European goods. I think the trade deal actually came through. We're charging a 15%, tariff on European goods, and we struck a trade deal there. But everything just seems so volatile. You don't know what's going to be tweeted out next. So how do you hedge a pipeline when that happens?
But
how do you?
But it's interesting what you said at the beginning is like rates really haven't changed that much. It's actually been, it's been within a band. I mean, it's been up and down and within a band, but I think it's like continues to be, people think it's a super volatile market, and maybe at some point it's not, right? At some point it's like we've not been as volatile as it feels like it should be.
Well, in volatile markets, probably in most tech innovation investments, obviously that gets jeopardized because people don't really know how much money, how much of a budget that they have for that particular tech. I would imagine, like we had said earlier, I would imagine solutions like yours in a volatile market, you want as sticky of a relationship with the consumer as you possibly can get. And that's an investment to create that stickiness in a really competitive market or in a more volatile market where, consumers have many more options, So it seems like it's good. It's good to be NewsZip or other solutions that whose value proposition is that. And it's probably more difficult for others. Yeah. No, I think that's right. And with we hit by a lot. We hit a record month in July. So we've been busy to that effect of, I think, more lenders feeling the bruise pushed of it's hard to do purchase. It's hard to do purchase nationally from consumer direct sites or from regional sites, and that they want more boots on the ground help with our concierge team and our local agents. So I think it's it's like, it's not, we all prefer like a faster paced market, but it's a market that's bringing a lot of attention to long-term client solutions, which we believe are a good one. It's interesting. I was on the phone with Jeremy about 20 minutes ago, about half an hour ago, before our call, and just to switch gears a little bit, we were just talking just more generally about the market and sort of the future of the market. And it's fascinating because my post about UWM being the largest retail lender in the country just completely blew up. Got 30,000 plus views, and it generated just a really seismic conversation in the industry around the future of retail and how that's going to be shaped. And what's interesting is, and I'm a retail thoroughbred. Like, I've been in this business. I kind of rode the growth of retail from 2010 onward. Before 2009, people forget that retail was only 30% of all mortgages. Okay. And between depository and the broker channel, the smallest leg in that stool was the independent mortgage banking channel. Okay.
Right.
And it's quite arguably possible that that the independent mortgage banking space could recess back down to mid to high 30s, because we're at about 49% now, down from 63%. I think was the independent mortgage banking segment high. Okay, and the question is, there's so many mortgage companies that are just struggling to compete with the competitive pricing strategies from brokers or those non-delegated correspondent partners, and then the large independent mortgage banking servicers that really get so much money from their servicing that kind of carries the retail operation.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, what's the current mix, do you think, of IMB to? I think the credit unions are 8 or 9%. Banks are, I don't know what bank share is.
So I don't know what the depository segmentation is. I believe the depository segmentation, I believe it goes something like this: like brokers and independent mortgage banks. I believe independent mortgage banks is about 50%. Brokers are about 28%, 28 to 29%.
Yeah.
And then the balance of that is split between credit unions, community banks, and commercial banks.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I've been to some credit union conferences recently because we've launched some credit union partners in that channel, and they're saying that 8, 9, 10% market share in mortgage with credit unions. And I think banks are similar to a little bit larger. So say they're low 20% depositories, 50% IMB, 30%, little, high 20% wholesale or broker rather.
What would you say to be the sentiment at these credit union conferences now? And do these credit union conferences focus on mortgage in particular, or are they just credit union conferences in general?
Yeah. I only really go to like credit union mortgage conferences, which is a niche. A lot of credit unions, outsource their mortgage operation, but the biggest ones have sizable mortgage operations. That's mostly who we work with. Their sentiment, it's a mix. Some of them are totally following the IMB playbook and just have, member owned. And so they, are really focused on having great pricing and things like that. And then some, and I think banks as well have mortgages kind of as like clients want them. It's not a huge business for them, but it's something they want to provide to their members. And, so it's kind of like, I think it's probably close to 50-50 between, CUs looking a lot like IMBs, and CUs looking nothing like, IMBs and taking much more of a, just want to offer member rewards, member benefits, and mortgage is just like a way to do that. One of their small ways to do that. I like the perspective in that part of the industry. They are adopting a lot of technology as well, actually.
It is kind of interesting because you got to wonder with the rise of the broker or the hybrid broker between mortgage brokering and mortgage banking, and let's say the decline of the retail independent mortgage bank, what that means for the depository community. Because it seemed like for years that once Bank of America and Wells, once they started sort of stepping away from mortgages or not leaning into it quite as heavily as they were, the sentiment was largely that they were depositories were getting out of mortgages because of the cost to compete. So what do you think? What's the sentiment there? Because I know for me, there's only a very few mortgage companies that I can actually that are banks that I think that are really successful mortgage operations, notwithstanding Chase and Wells and B of A, because they're always going to be a top. Those guys are always going to be, even without trying, they're going to be a top 10, top 20 lender. But there's companies like First Community Mortgage out of Tennessee that I find really interesting. They do about $3 billion or so in originations, about $1.5 billion in originations. The other half, I think, are wholesale. And there's Novus, home loans, I think it is, that's run by Eric Egenhofer. And
they're owned by a bank. I think they're a mortgage operation, IMB operation under a bank, right? I think. If I remember correctly. Yeah.
So it's fascinating. So do you see that segment expanding, or do you think that this is all going to move to the broker, to independent mortgage banking broker side of the space?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably where I got like selective data. The banks I talk to are the ones that are trying to build out consumer direct mortgage and want help with the real estate side, or ones that are trying to work on similar to like the servicers, kind of like retention and people have their other products, they want to make them mortgage offers. So I probably only talk to the banks and credit unions that are more aggressively trying to stay in or get in the space. We've had a lot of conversations. Not all have turned into launched partnerships, obviously, but we've had a lot of conversations with banks wanting to, and credit unions, but banks particularly wanting to upscale their purchase lending with maybe a mix of retail and consumer direct strategies. But again, self-selecting of who talks to NewZip is probably not a good barometer for all banks.
Yeah, maybe not, but I think you have a pretty diverse ear to the ground. Just having just because you go to so many conferences, you talk to so many people. That I would say that's one of my biggest challenges I have with with many of the economists is because they just read the numbers and they don't quite understand the space. They academically understand how mortgage works. I was talking to an economist yesterday out of DC who works actually pretty closely with Chairman Powell, and it was curious to me, like his observations. His thought was jumbos, mortgage companies make the most out of jumbos, and that the depository space was 30-40% of all mortgages and all this stuff. And I was just like, I don't know where you're getting your data, because it's not true at all. Like it's just the problem, the space, if you don't understand the space, it genuinely can be confusing, how to understand the data.
Yeah. I mean, still to this day, I think a ton of consumers assume that they'll just use whatever bank they use for their other accounts for a mortgage. So it's always like an uphill battle I give a lot of credit to the IMBs and brokers that don't have those existing client relationships through either a servicing book or bank products. But we are seeing a lot of, I feel like we're seeing it all merge together a little bit with technology. Like, a lot of IMBs are launching like a credit card, or a lot of IMBs are launching like fintech initiatives, whether it's like, Rocket Money is obviously very visible with Rocket, but all these other budgeting apps that lenders are partnering with, or credit cards that lenders are partnering with, IMBs particularly, but some credit unions as well and banks.
Yeah.
So I do think like we're starting to get to a place where it's kind of what you're saying a second ago. The distinctions are getting harder. It's like depository versus non-depository, but Rocket has depository products that they partner with, right? And I think Fairway, is talking about launching, a card. UWM launched a card. I'm no expert on that part of the space, but when IMBs start to have their own credit card and their own savings account partnership and their own whatever else partnership, it starts to be closer to a depository conversation. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It'll be fascinating to see the tug of war, that continues to occur between brokers and independent mortgage banks. I think to sort of speak for Jeremy and not necessarily to solely speak for him, but for me, it does. I think we are in agreement that the future of this business is going to be leaner. It's going to be smarter. It's going to be faster. Especially with AI and the different technologies that are only going to bring more tailored solutions to consumers. And all this, the more acute that, information we have on the consumer, the more tailored that pricing strategy can be, which I believe is going to bring costs down.
Yeah.
And that's only going to stretch and really pinch many of the independent mortgage banks that just don't have the capital to continue to survive. Brokers, right. There's not a lot of cost behind a broker. And then even if you're an independent mortgage bank that has a warehouse line that has all your back office functions supported by UWM or Rocket or other platforms, there's still not a lot of cost behind you.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's so capital light to even become a mortgage broker, let alone continue to operate as one.
Yeah. So, well, yeah. a lot of these companies, different organizations might have. These individual loan officers who plug into these large non-delegated correspondent platforms. They're almost all independent companies. I mean, a lot of them are paid 1099. So they by definition are independent companies, or sole proprietors. My question for you is, like, as a vendor, especially a company like NewRez, is there a way, would you sell individually to each loan officer, or would you just have an offering that you sort of opt in at the corporate level, where one of the loan officers just checks a box and say, hey, I want to have all my files monitored by NewRez, and that way I can get connected into this workflow. So that way, if there's any issues, you know what I mean? Like how would something like that work, or how would that be deployed?
Yeah. I think to some extent, it's a little bit different for our product, but I'll give you another example first, because I was just hanging out with him this week. Our friend Brian View, I think, has done a good job of cracking that nut with FinLocker, where they have, I don't know how many dozens of enterprise partnerships, but then they have thousands of individual loan officers who sign up for for a low fee per month, just like they would for any like fintech or tool. NewZip doesn't have it. It doesn't work quite that way, where we make virtually all our money on real estate closings. It's even simpler than that in a lot of ways. But we've still mostly favored launching enterprises, having the buy-in of launching teams at a time and as like a bigger initiative within a company goes a long way. But NewZip is like available to Nexa loan officers, for example. We've been vetted and signed a contract with them to make it available to their loan officers, essentially for free. There's some costs if they want to do certain extra integrations and things, but basically any Nexa originator can use NewZip for free under a blanket agreement to all their, whatever it is, 3,000, 4,000 loan officers. So that's like an area I want to spend more time on in the coming years. We've focused pretty directly on IMBs for the last couple of years because that was kind of the obvious growth point for NewZip, but we've continued to find that different channels value the service. I was surprised, honestly, that credit unions are so excited about our service, and we've signed probably 15 credit unions in not that long, in a little over a year of even pitching to that space, and continue to be involved in that community. The broker community, I'd like to set up more. I'd like to set up, maybe it's a offering within AIM. I know they do a good job of it. I partnered with them before in my last company to make an offering available through them or through other groups of like marketplaces where loan officers can pick and choose what tools they want. We'd love for NewZip to be in more of those places. But yeah, it really comes down to anyone that wants to build new realtor partnerships or anyone that wants to expand regionally where they need agent coverage. Period. So that's where it like goes from a nice to have to like a need to have. If you're a loan officer that's going to a second state or a new channel or a new space, that's where you're going to need the help of vetted agents that are going to protect your business. So that's where NewZip becomes really valuable. But yeah, we're a tech company. I'm really one of the few folks on our team that came from like the industry background. Everyone else is kind of like scalable tech startup backgrounds on our team for the most part. Yeah. And we've gone to great lengths to look differently than our competitors, do today, and way different than our competitors did 10 years ago, where it was just big, heavy enterprise deals, and that instead we can set up a partnership in less than a day. If a single mortgage broker has a deal that they want to send through NewZip, that's something that we can take that day. They have to sign some data sharing agreement. They have to do a couple things. Not saying it's nothing. We have to dot our I's and cross our T's, but we try to be very simple to partner with.
Well, good. Well, any other sort of concluding comments for this week here? August 1st. Can you believe it, dude? It's the the third quarter is almost. I mean, we're well underway to the third quarter. We're going to turn the market corner here, rolling into the fourth quarter. Yeah, 2025 is almost done.
Yeah,
I mean, isn't that wild?
Especially from a real estate standpoint, or I guess by extension a purchase standpoint, just absolutely pressing the gas right now because the Q4 slowdown is coming really soon. So this is probably the most aggressive we've ever been from a sales and growth standpoint, and I'm sure encourage everyone else to think of it the same way. The Q4 holiday slowdown, winter slowdown in home sales purchase is coming really soon. I can't believe it's August, so we gotta hit it while we can.
Really fascinating. Really fascinating. Well, look, let's a wrap. Appreciate your leadership, man. Your leadership's amazing in the business. I think we just need to continue to lean into it. I'm going to the Housing Wire AI conference here in a couple of weeks, and then of course in the fall there's the Housing Wire IMB conference in October, the MBA conference in October. There's a lot of conferences that are coming up. So yeah, what's on your radar?
Yeah, I'm not going to make the AI summit, unfortunately, but I will definitely go to Housing Wire IMB. That's a great one for us.
Oh yeah,
I will definitely go to Annual. I want to set up some plans for Annual soon, actually, like having a NewZip hosted dinner and stuff like that again.
Nice.
So I'll keep you posted on that. And then Yeah, there's some smaller conferences thinking of getting out to. Some broker conferences thinking of getting out to this year. Didn't do any last year. Probably should have. So yeah, we'll have to keep comparing notes.
No, absolutely. Look forward to it. Looks like we obviously missed Jeremy this week, but he's never too far from our thoughts. What's that?
I got to see him in person. He was able to join a New Zip team dinner in Detroit on Monday. We went out.
Really?
We have a growing portion of our team is in Metro Detroit. So I went out there, met with some new team members and existing team members, and we launched a new site. There's a new. I mean, you heard on our show last week that New Res is launching a site in Metro Detroit for their purchase group and purchase retention group. And so I kind of double dipped and spent a couple of days in Detroit, and then launching that new team in Metro Detroit. But got to hang out with Jeremy a couple of days.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's good. Yeah, he's a good leader, but obviously a good friend.
Yeah,
good friend of the podcast. So, but yeah, well, look, I definitely look forward to seeing you sometime soon at one of the conferences, and let's definitely keep in touch. Okay.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good weekend.
Take care, man.
See ya.